Hi, this is Denise Matthew, and welcome to my new series, Voice of Creation, where we explore what is considered to be the place where all the magic and manifestation lives, and also where we give voice to our creations, the throat center. You probably already know that the human design body graph consists of 9 centers. While each is important in its own way, in this series we will be focusing on the throat center, also called the gearbox of the body graph, or the place where dreams manifest into reality. As we move deeper into the throat center, we'll talk more about the manifestation of the throat center, as well as the gates and channels, and much more. But for now, let's talk about the basics, as well as the open and defined throat. Just like all other parts of the chart, understanding our unique configuration gives us the information we need to navigate the world. In human design, the throat center would probably be the most important center when it comes to how it determines what type you are, how it determines how you communicate, and also how it determines what we bring from our dreams into reality. But before we go deeper and into more detail, we first need to get a brief idea about the throat center, what it is, how it works, as well as what it means to have an open throat, a defined throat, and also a motorized throat. As I just said, how your throat is configured is a key factor in determining what your human design type is. We'll first talk about reflectors because we know that they don't have any centers defined, which means that a reflector type always has an open throat, which is white, so it's easy to remember. And we also know that manifesting generators and manifestor types will always have a motorized throat because that is a prerequisite to be those particular types. And that leaves projectors and generator types. And while both types have non-motorized throats, they can have 2 different types of throats. And that means they can have an open throat or a defined throat. Based on the Jovian Archive statistics, manifestors make up just under 10% of all types, and manifesting generators make up about 30% of all types. So about 40% of all types are motorized throats. Reflectors are about 1.5%, so projectors and generator types are the other 58 or so percent. And they can have either undefined or defined throats, as I just said. And having an open, undefined throat is not common, and only 1/8 of the population actually have this configuration. And what all those statistics mean is that you'll probably know people who fall in all categories. Now that we know that there are 3 states of being when it comes to the throat center, let's talk about the differences between them. And just a reminder that the colors of the human design centers are always a specific color. So when they're defined, they always have a specific color, and when they're open, they're always white. So it's easy to see in any body graph when a center is defined. And when it comes to the throat center, it will be either brown or white. And when we're talking about any defined center, including a defined throat, we're always talking about an expression that is more fixed in a defined center and an expression that is more fluid when the center is undefined. But when it comes to having a motorized or a non-motorized throat, both centers are going to be brown. So that can be confusing. So let's understand what the difference is between a non-motorized and a motorized throat. In human design, the most important part of the throat center is that as much energy as possible gets to the throat. And that energy comes from the motors, the 4 motors of the human design system. So that means that theoretically, when you have a motor directly connected to the throat that is consistent or also considered defined, manifestation occurs easier. But since only manifesting generators and manifestors have this configuration, how do all the other types manifest their dreams into reality? To explain how it works for people who have non-motorized throats, we first need to talk about motors. There are 4 motors in the human design body graph. The sacral is the most powerful and is defined in all generator types. The root is the weakest motor since it's the furthest away. And the other 2 are the will center and also the solar plexus. When you have a link or a channel that takes a motor directly to the throat, you have the design of a manifestor or a manifesting generator. Now, generators and projectors might have motors defined in their chart or hanging gates that connect to a motor, but that doesn't mean that they have a direct connection. So that means that generator and projector types need help to get the energy to the throat or to get a direct channel from a motor to the throat. And that means that they need other people, and that's where electromagnetics come into play, as well as planetary transits. If we're talking about electromagnetics, we can imagine that two people have what's called hanging gates, or gates that don't make a complete channel. In this image, we see that somebody has a gate 12 and the other person has a gate 22. So they both have half of the channel 12-22. When the two come together, the energy is connected, or it forms a channel, and that means that they have the channel between them 12-22, which brings the solar plexus to the throat and also takes a motor to the throat. Alternately, someone with a non-motorized throat can benefit from the energy of people with a motorized throat, even if there are no electromagnetics between them. Because what happens is the person with a motorized throat pretty much shares the energy with the person with the non-motorized throat, so that the person with the non-motorized throat can benefit from the interaction. And one more thing to keep in mind is that just because they're sharing the energy, or the motorized throat is sharing the energy, doesn't mean that anybody loses out on anything. In fact, it really is a win-win, because the person that has a non-motorized throat gets to have the motor to the throat, and the other person who has a motorized throat doesn't feel anything different in any way, shape, or form. And the other way to get a motor to the throat is through planetary transits. And if you want more information on how that works, you can check out my video where I talk all about planetary transits, and I'll leave the link below. Now that we know what a motorized and non-motorized throat is, let's talk about what the difference between an open throat is and also a defined throat. And just for review, let's talk about what it means when a center is open. So when we talk about an open center of any kind, we're talking about a more fluid expression of the energy of that center, because based on human design, the energy that is expressed in that center is dependent on the people that are around them. When we're talking about somebody with an open throat, we're talking about somebody who can change their voice and expression based on their audience. And when we're talking about somebody with a defined throat, it's more regulated in how they express themselves. And quite often, they will have a way of expressing themselves that is predictable for them, or their go-to way of speaking. But one thing holds true for the both of them. Regardless if the throat center is defined or open, if it's not motorized, waiting for recognition is a huge part of the strategy that will have them being heard in the best possible way. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. When we talk about somebody with an open throat, we have an individual who can shift up the way they speak based on who they're talking to. And in this way, they can connect with a broader audience. And when you have an open throat center, it means that the energy that powers your throat is influenced by people who are around you. Basically, people who have defined throat centers. And it doesn't matter if they're motorized or non-motorized. As long as they're defined, they are releasing energy that is fixed and accessible to anybody with an open throat. And it's also important to know that when somebody has an open throat, whatever energy they're absorbing is really specific to them as soon as it becomes theirs. And one more thing to note is that not only is the energy absorbed by somebody with an open throat, but it's also amplified or made bigger. When we consider that only 1/8 of the population has an open or undefined throat, it's easy to see that there's a lot of energy around available to absorb. And because of that, it means that there's a lot of absorbing, and as expected, there can be a buildup of energy that eventually causes pressure. And this pressure needs a release. But because this energy is all about having an invitation to express or recognition, there can be an explosive use of the throat energy, because when the pressure gets to be too much, the energy needs to go somewhere. On the low side, this can be people who dominate conversations by cutting in while others are talking, and also there can be a lot of talking over other people. There can be some mindless chatter or even a loud outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere. And because the energy of the open throat is fluid, there can be potential for burnout and overuse of the throat, causing something as minor as a hoarse throat to something more serious like thyroid conditions. The natural state of the open throat is silence, and when someone with an open throat or a defined throat is quiet and waits for recognition or an invitation to share what they know, the experience of being seen and heard in the way that values what they have to bring to the table can be one of the most rewarding experiences that they can have. Without recognition, people with an open throat or a defined throat might feel unseen, unheard, and sometimes they may even feel invisible. And it's not uncommon for them to be victims of bullying. And another thing to keep in mind is that it's less about the person. It's not a personal thing, and it's more about the energy. And when you have an open throat, the more you use the energy to your advantage rather than letting it use you, the better things get. Ultimately, when someone with an open throat or defined throat waits for recognition or an invitation, then the drawbridge opens up and people can enter the castle of the individual, and they can experience and appreciate the treasures that lie within. And all the things that they wanted to talk about find willing ears, and the message that burns within their souls will find its mark. But since being silent can be tough for someone with a non-motorized throat, and our today's society doesn't encourage people to be quiet, waiting can be painstakingly difficult. But if you can hold on to the idea that what you have to share is too valuable to be wasted on those who don't see the worth in your words, then waiting takes on a whole new theme. And even though it might be tough, every time you wait in silence for the right timing, it's like you become a magnet that draws people to you. Knowing your value, how your energy works, as well as understanding that your time will come, can be the key that allows you to be heard and seen and not lost in the fray of voices. And even though the theme of being invisible can be even greater with people with open throats, the gifts that are contained within your makeup can be powerful. There's no mistake that many singers, impressionists, and inspirational speakers have open throats because the wisdom of the open center knows how to modulate the energy to best meet the needs of their audience. And when you have the recognition, people will be drawn in by your words, and the things that you uniquely speak about will become treasured additions to the collective. A notable singer who has an open or undefined throat is Lady Gaga. In the beginning of her career, she was all about outlandish costumes and outfits, which can be classic attention-seeking behavior of someone with an open throat. But later in her career, when she had established her audience and people appreciated and loved her voice and talent, she took a more measured approach to how she presented herself. And in doing so, gained more appreciation by a wider audience, and every year her career continues to grow and thrive. Jim Carrey, a famous actor, comedian, and artist who is well known for his impressions and quirky acting, began with energetic slapstick performances that got the attention of people. And it was the beginning of a long and varied career that stretched over many different genres. His open throat meant that he could play to the masses and use his voice in a way that few can. In fact, many former presidents and leaders in their own right have open throats too. Abraham Lincoln, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Walt Disney, Edgar Cayce, and Albert Einstein are a few notable people with open throat centers. And another interesting fact is that many of these people with open throats, although they have used their voices on their path to success, many have used alternative forms of expression to find their voice in the world. Walt Disney used animation to communicate his message. Edgar Cayce used his voice to channel spirit and was called the sleeping prophet. And Albert Einstein used scientific theories to be heard, meaning that just like the expression of the open throat is fluid, so too are the many ways to communicate and have your voice known and heard exactly as you've always wanted. Well, that's all I have for this episode, and please be sure to check out the next episode of The Voice of Creation when I talk about the motorized throat in human design. Take care, and I'll see you soon.